Whoop, we got bit, we're getting busy, we've been busy $11. There we go.
I'm a silent partner, sure.
He's a money man, behind the scenes.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, guys, and thanks for coming, and got a lot to talk about here today. Looking back at our old business, we're completely out of old crop, so I didn't put anything down for old crop. We kind of turned the page on that. As far as new crop goes, we're 75% hedged on new crop corn, 50% on new crop beans. The corn breakdown is we still own a 560 long December put. The 660 call we exited for 2.5 cents, so we no longer have that obligation if the market were to move upwards. And we're short a 460 put, which means we're kind of maxed out at about $1 gain on that at this point. We also have 25% with a long 470 December put. Again, we exited the short 570 call for 3 3/4, and we still hold the short 370 put, which I'm not too worried about at this point. We also had bought a 25% stake in a May short-dated option spread that we paid 13 cents for, I believe, and no, I'm sorry, for 2 cents that expired worthless, and I replaced that with a $4.99 D's 14 futures sale, so that's how we got to 75%. With soybeans, we did a 25% hedge with an option spread. We exited the 960 put when the market was up at 3 3/4. So now we have an unlimited floor below 1160. We still have the short 1360 call, but you know, with a few more days like yesterday, I would like to exit that thing before we get into the real crux of the soybean flowering, potting, filling stage as we get closer to August. I think we'll be able to get out of that a lot cheaper though than, you know, maybe 6-8 cents before we decide to exit it. It's going to be a timing thing though, because I really don't want to ride that thing into a, you know, if we were to get into a warm part of the summer. Albeit, you know, if we can't get out right on that thing, let's not forget it's 25%. It would be the only thing we would be margining in an upside move. So from a cash management standpoint, I don't think we'd have a real hard time managing it if we can't get out smartly on it. I'm not, you know, in other words, if 1360 becomes an issue, then that's probably going to be a pretty good problem to have if it were to be an issue. I doubt it will be, and we'll discuss why here shortly. For the hog guys, the only thing we've done new since the last meeting is we did do a option spread this time around. We put it in such a way where we got bought a July 118 put, shorted the 122 call, and bought the 130 call just in case we went and put new highs in again, which since that time we have. So any losses are limited. We basically at this point are going to be looking at 122 for our price, and anything above 130 we could add to that, to put it in as simple terms, you know, as I can. Did a similar thing in August, again shorting the 122 call and long the 130 call. So, you know, we have at this point, unless something changes dramatically, which of course it could, the worst we're going to do is 116. The best we're going to do is 122, and we could do better than 122 depending on how far over 130 we go. So anyway, we were 70% hedged for the June 15, August 15 time period, and we're wide open past there, which I'm happy with at this point. We'll talk about that later. Still uncovered on our new crop feed needs. The crux of why we're here today, though, is to discuss yesterday's reports and what they mean going forward. First and foremost, it's pretty easy to say that the headline number yesterday was the soybean acreage number. Not only did it set an all-time high for U.S. soybean acres, as you can see from the table attached, we were 2.7 million acres over the average trade guess. We were a stunning 3.4 million acres higher than March. And as you can see in the last column there, we are 8.3 million acres over a year ago. So pretty impressive amount of soybeans went in the ground this spring. As far as corn goes, as you can see, the 91.64 was very close to the average trade guess of 91.72. It also was very close, within 50,000 acres of the March acreage report, and obviously down not quite 4 million acres from a year ago. So, you know, the corn numbers were relatively neutral. As to why the market responded the way it did, we'll talk about that here in a second. But even with that decline, that small decline, you know, it's important to remember it was still the 5th largest corn acreage figure ever. So well down from last year's record, but still a hefty amount of corn acres that went in this spring. As we look over, you guys flip the page there, as we start looking at the stocks figures, again, the corn stocks figure of 3.854 was up about 130 million from the average trade guess, up about 1.1 billion from a year ago at this time. Soybeans at 405 was up 27 million from the average trade guess, but down 30 million bushels from last year. Wheat was very close to the average trade guess and obviously down considerably from a year ago. The stocks did indicate the second lowest corn feed and residual period for the March-May period, this last quarter in history. Some of that probably has to do with the hog and cattle numbers, especially the, as the hog guys will discuss later, the hog numbers came in considerably lower than what the trade was looking for. Probably even more so, and we've talked about this at several of the meetings, USDA had been calling for an 18 to 20% increase in feed and residual usage all year, even though animal numbers are slightly below a year ago. How you feed 18–20% more when you have less animals is you know, a question for the ages, I guess. Cheaper prices have a tendency to increase that feed usage, but there were questions all along, and in fact, in 5 of the last 6 years, now it'll be 6 out of the last 7 years, the June 1 corn stocks figure went the opposite versus the trade estimate that the March estimate went. So in other words, in March, we had less corn than what the trade was looking for. Now 6 out of 7 years in a row, we've seen the opposite occur in the June report. So probably not a big surprise. Is it a deal breaker in corn? No. You know, 130 million bushels one way or another is certainly not a deal breaker. But there were quite a few whispers in the market that with the strong export pace, good ethanol margins, there was a hope that maybe we fed even a little more than that, or used a little more than that, so that kind of dashed some of those hopes a little bit. The soybean stocks figure, even though it's down 7% from a year ago, was above the average trade guess. The 387 trade guess, 387 million, would have been the lowest since 1977. So from a relative standpoint, are we still tight on soybeans? Yes, we're still tight on soybeans. Important to remember that even though we're 30 million below a year ago, we're also looking, according to USDA, and this may be adjusted, and if it is adjusted, it'll probably be lower. We're also importing more than we did a year ago to help offset that, although imports don't appear to be running at the pace, that 90 million bushel pace that the USDA was forecasting previously. So, you know, you're looking at a situation where old crop soybeans are going to be relatively tight. We're not going to run out of them. We probably have to keep prices high enough to ration a little bit. Basis and spreads can do a lot of it at this point, this late in the marketing year, as opposed to a futures move. So without, you know, some kind of bullish input from the weather, we've certainly seen a top in old crop bean prices, and they may not lose ground relative to new crop, but you know, they're going to be subject to weather as much as anything else. We did see a slight increase in spring wheat acres. We saw an increase in cotton acres. As you guys recall, when we were here in March, we talked about how the USDA's aggregate acreage figure was about the same as last year, planting intentions, even though last year we saw over 8 million acres of prevent plant. Previous year in 2012, which, you know, planting was a dream in 2012 because it was so dry, we still lost a couple million acres of prevent plant, and we talked about, well, you know, let's split the difference and maybe say we lose 4 million acres of prevent plant this year. that still leaves 4 million acres unaccounted for, and I think we found the majority of them yesterday. A lot of them coming from into the soybean complex. So these are what we're going to have to live with in terms of acres and stocks. We do have a tendency to see final U.S. corn acres. Even a year like last year, the March to June changes tend to be very small. Last year we lost 1.5, 1.6 million acres from the June to the final, but you got to remember, by the time you get around to January, nobody really cares about that anymore. We already know what production is, and they can argue about 1 million acres this way or another, but it won't be a trend changer by any stretch. So this is what we have to live with. And as I said, the only number that was remotely supportive yesterday, and I would say remotely, you know, the corn acres were 50,000 below in March, but really a non-factor when you had very bearish acreage number for soybeans, and to a lesser degree bearish soybean stocks and corn stocks in the old crop. So not much to like there at this point. The other thing we have to be cognizant of is we're still looking at a relatively large fund position on the corn side and to a lesser degree on the soybean side. And you know, we've kind of forgotten about it because we haven't seen it for a while, but you know, these guys can be short just as they can be long. In fact, they're building a fairly large short position in the wheat market right now. And if things keep continuing weather-wise the way they're continuing, I would anticipate we're going to see them eventually build a short position in corn and soybeans as well. So that's something we have to be careful of, and I don't want to get ahead of myself too much here. Does anybody have any questions just on the reports yesterday before we really talk about the implications as far as prices go? Any comments on the reports? I said there weren't a lot of numbers to dissect because it's just a stocks report and an acreage report. Now the impact of this will show up first in the supply and demand report in 10, 12 days, or sometime 10th, 12th of July, I don't remember exactly which day it is. Then they'll start plugging these numbers in. You don't always see the USDA and their statistical arm agree. It's not like they take it and say, okay, we're going to take this and put it right on or right off the balance sheet. It doesn't always happen that way. We always assume it will, but it doesn't always happen that way. But by and large, we can probably look for a slight increase in U.S. corn ending stocks, and we could see a slight increase. And maybe, I'm less inclined to say that we're going to see an increase in soybean stocks because we're already running so far ahead on the export side and the crush side that these numbers just might make the balance sheets work instead of looking kind of like fantasy world. So I doubt we'll see any substantial change in soybeans, but we'll probably see an upward tick in the corn side in terms of carryout, and of course that rolls right over into new crop as well. So what we're left with right now is, other than weather, we're looking at a period. The July report won't be a biggie. The next big report, August 12th, will be the first field surveyed crop estimate, where the USDA actually goes out and into the fields and counts ears, counts plants, counts pods, and what have you. And of course, that one's always a big one. If you look at it in terms of the impact on individual crops, it's getting kind of, I know people don't always want to hear this, but it's kind of getting late now to see anything happen in the corn market. It would take something extraordinary in terms of disease or in terms of wind or something wild, early frost, something like that, to threaten the crop. There's just very few areas of the Corn Belt that have any dryness concerns. Obviously, there are some wet pockets out there, but it's like I say, it's like paying taxes. If you're going to have a problem, that's the problem you want to have, as opposed to not enough moisture. And it seems like every year, it's been years in fact, where you can't go back and see a part of the Midwest that isn't struggling, particularly that southwestern part, the Central Plains area that struggled with drought, and we don't have that. The Delta's got moisture, the Southeast has moisture, the Plains has moisture, the Northern Plains has too much moisture, But by and large, nobody's lacking for moisture. So, you know, are we going to take some losses in harvested acres? Yeah, we probably will. But it's getting a little bit late in terms of the corn market trying to bounce. Right now, if you followed advice, you should be 75% hedged in corn. I don't see, you know, yesterday was a pretty sharp down day for the corn market. I could see, though, corn, I said treading water, which is probably a bad thing to say, but I could see the corn market kind of treading water for the next 6 weeks, maybe, until at least that August crop report. One thing we have to remember with the advent of revenue insurance, you know, there's a lot of people now who, until you actually see the bushels go across the scale, they're going to say, well, I got revenue insurance, why would I price it down here? I'm not saying that's a good attitude to have. It may not be the correct attitude to have, but I think you're going to see a lot of people now that, you know, said, I've ridden it this long, why do anything now? And that would have a tendency to reduce some of the selling pressure coming to the market. We've still got over 100,000 managed fund longs in the market that have to, or not have to, but likely will liquidate and possibly even entertain a short position. You got a lot of producers, believe it or not. There's a friend of mine who's run a grain trucking business for years and years and years. He told me he's booked up to the middle of August hauling corn and soybeans off the farm. A lot of people got stuck holding the bag. You know, we make these transitions. You know, 4 or 5 years ago we were talking about the transition to higher prices. Now we're starting to talk about the transition to lower prices, and it's very difficult to, you know, I hear people say, well, I can't make money there. And I'm like, where were you before 2005? When did anybody ever care if you made money? You know, that wasn't always a prerequisite to whether you continue to farm or not. So, you know, we're reaching a point where we're transitioning to a different phase in terms of pricing opportunities. And it's not just what you can see out your backyard. There are bigger forces at work in the world as well. With that said, I would like to hedge another 25% of the corn crop, which, you know, simple math, that would put you up to 100%. Now, that doesn't mean 100% sold in the cash market. Okay, I don't expect that. We're already holding, of our 75%, 50% is in options. So I would doubt it would be an option position. It's probably going to be a HTA cash type instrument, which would put us up 50% in that side, with the other half being held with options. I'd like to get that done. You know, I think we could see a minor bounce to do that. I would be pleased at this point if we were, you know, if we were able to go up and test the 450 area in September corn. I'd be very pleased to. And December corn, 450, 475 in that area. You know, we need to look at it. Doesn't sound good. You know, one of the things that people fail to do year in, year out is they don't adjust. You know, as prices adjust, you have to adjust your bushel forecast as well. You know, they're constantly changing up and down. And you know, when you find out after the fact that you have 200 bushel corn, you say, "Gosh, I'm at 450. That's not so bad." You know, but if you've got a budget at 170 or 165 or something like that, which most guys are pretty conservative with their budgeting, you know, you need to adjust that and start thinking about that, because you could spend the rest of the winter looking up at a price like 450, 475, and you know, everybody and their brother wanting to sell that price. The other thing I want to do in the corn market is I want to start looking at an initial hedge in the 15-16 crop year. Not both years, the 2015, the one you'll plant next spring, just to get something on the books. Again, somewhere out in that 450, 475 is the starting point. Probably looking at an option-based strategy there, guys, because as we've learned, and I hope we're learning, the less we know, the more flexibility we want with our marketing. And we know very little about 2015, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start looking at something to at least get started with. Looking at soybeans, I mean, that acreage figure, I've already heard some people say, okay, so there's a little dryness in August, big deal. We got so many acres, what's the difference? Yesterday's 2.7 million additional acres, to put it in numerical terms, if you keep a 45 bushel national average for soybeans, you basically found 120 million bushels of soybeans yesterday, on top of what people were expecting. That's a pretty good chunk of change for soybeans. About 3%, if you want to turn it into acres, you found about 3% more. So, if you took every field in the United States and drowned it out 3%, we took care of that yesterday. And we're in the same boat we were the previous day. So, they definitely built in a cushion here. I want to go ahead, it's important that we get another 25% of the 14-15, the one out in the field crop hedge. Again, probably looking at something as we get closer to the reproductive phase, and I'm talking mid-late July, looking at a cash instrument, because right now we're holding a quarter in options, a quarter in cash, probably bump that up another quarter to a cash or futures instrument, bringing us overall to 75 but 50% in the cash market. I want to, in terms of time, everything's about timing and price. Obviously, the closer we get into early August, the less picky I'd be in terms of price. If we got a bounce quicker than that, I'd be willing to entertain, taking a little risk. If they gave us the right price, even though the timing was a little bit early, that would be fine. But we need to get to that 75% figure relatively soon. Let's see. Other thing I want to look, and I talked about this already, so I'm not going to hit it again, but I do want to look at those 1360 calls. If we can get out looking smartly on this down move, we'll do so. Otherwise, we might hold those things. And if we do start to see a rally, in lieu of pricing any more new crop, we'd look at that 1360 and then probably replace one for the other. In other words, let's say new crop beans jump back up to 1275. We might sell the cash and then buy the 1360. And even though we pay a little more to buy the 1360 back than we want, I wouldn't want that unfunded liability, if you will. I mean, the government can run unfunded liabilities, but we can't. So I don't want to see that. So we would probably replace it up for a like, get out of the option, replace it with futures. And in both cases, it would put us 75%. Longer term, and you guys probably don't want to hear this, but I really don't think the ultimate lows in the grain market are going to occur this fall. I think the ultimate lows are more likely to occur in mid to late winter, early 2015. And why? Well, one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what is the function of a market in a surplus environment? It's to get rid of the surplus or bring it down to more manageable levels. And how do you do that? You do it by price. So, we've got to get grain prices sometime, right now we're looking at depending on who you want to talk to, 60, 70% chance of an El Nino year. The correlation to the U.S. is far less than what it is to South America, and particularly Argentina, South Brazil has a very strong correlation in El Nino years to wet years for them. So, if you're a betting man, you'd have to bet that they're looking at a pretty good crop next year. More acres, as usual, and decent growing weather. If that occurs following our crop, that we'll know that in mid-late January into February. What else happens in February? A lot of pencil pushing going on in February with, what I want to plant next year. And of course, March 1st, we'll find out what your revenue guarantee would be. All of those things, I think, if they occur as I think they're going to happen, it tells me that you're going to have to get prices to a level that will A, attract demand, and B, discourage production. Maybe not here as much as in some of the areas of this country and other parts of the world that are higher cost producers. They're going to have to bring it down where they can't afford to plant a high dollar crop like corn. They can't afford to be tearing up more acres down in South America and putting in beans. And it's not just, this whole northern hemisphere at this point. China's had very good weather. European Union, allegedly, and particularly France, has had some of the best weather they've ever had. Some of their crop ratings are off the charts. You know, I think the last corn rating I saw was like 77, 76% good to excellent over there. Just very, very good crops over there. The FSU regions are in good shape. The only areas of concern right now is the monsoon in India is coming in late. That's really, I mean, in terms of have an impact, El Nino has a tendency to hurt Australian production, has a tendency to hurt Southeast Asia, particularly the palm oil, that area's production, if we do get into an El Nino situation. But thus far, even Australia looks pretty good. Now, they're just getting close to planting time down there, but it's not like they're going in dry. Demand side, when you start looking at demand, a lot of people were surprised. I wasn't that surprised after talking to people that I have contact with. A lot of people were surprised that the livestock guys weren't responding faster to lower prices. But you got to understand, a lot of these guys have been victims, particularly some of these large corporate interests where a lot of our expansion comes from. They've really been victimized by this boy who cries wolf. You know, the last 3 or 4 years we kept talking, yeah, if we grow a decent crop this year, we're going to have cheap prices. Well, we didn't grow decent crops and we didn't have cheap prices. So they're very hesitant to start putting buildings up and start placing more animals. We just saw it in the hog and pig report. You know, everyone was shocked that the breeding herd was actually down a little bit, not up. So, and it was a pretty large miss for a report like that, especially on the breeding side. So, you know, you've got to get prices low enough where these livestock guys feel comfortable enough to go ahead and take that risk and go ahead and start looking at expansion. Ethanol. You know, we're already looking at, they're running up against the blending wall. Their margins are great. They couldn't be happier right now, the ethanol interests. But you can only push so much ethanol because of the blend wall. You know?
How much more can you export though?
Well, you can continue to export, Rick. That's true. And that's where it's keeping them, you know, that's what's helping right now is that they are exporting a lot. But there are limits on that as well, on how much they can export. They've been able to take a lot of South American slack. You know, we've been the low-cost ethanol producer because of what, you know, they had a drought last year in the sugar areas of Brazil. And it drove that sugar-corn spread wide enough where we became the low-cost supplier to the world. But what I'm saying is you can't look for dynamic growth like we saw the last 4 or 5 years up until we hit the blend wall. You know, that we were averaging 400 million bushels, 500 million bushels of ethanol demand a year for 4 or 5 years, increases. You know, we don't have that anymore. So, you know, you gotta, most of the ethanol, the overwhelming majority of ethanol we produce goes out in gasoline, blended with gasoline. And, you know, that's the other thing that can't help is you still got oil prices because of all the instability going on in the Middle East. They're still elevated. So that has a tendency to tamp down demand for gasoline. So,
Got 5 billion bushel crush on ethanol. How much more space we got left with ethanol plants? Or what's the percent utilization of that plant?
it's not that there's not capacity, Rick. It's they don't have a market for it, their product.
But if there is a market, what more can we do?
Well, I mean, we mothballed. There's still ethanol plants not running.
Because it's inefficient.
Because, I mean, California, some of these silly areas, they never should have put them to begin with. You know, we've still got some of that. And, of course, there's the DDG question. You know, with China still blocking DDGs, that had a real cascading effect on DDG prices. And DDGs are one of their greatest profit centers. You know, they were selling DDGs at 30% higher than corn. And now they're back down about 80% of corn, ballpark. That's a pretty big part of their margin that went away. They're still projecting positive margins, but not the kind, you know, you got to have a buyer at some point. I don't care how much capacity you have or how many profits you have, you got to find a buyer. And that's what they're up against right now. Technically, as you look at the corn market, December corn put in a new contract low yesterday. When you look at weekly continuous charts, the 408 area would be kind of a stopping point for the corn market, and that is an area where, like I said, I could see us just do some base building, some sideways, tread water, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, when you look at a chart and you start looking at potential stocks to usage ratios and saying, and then you throw that out on a linear graph, if with the kind of stocks to use ratio we could have this year, you're looking at about $3.50 corn at some point. Technically, that's also a good stopping point for technical. So what matches up fundamentally and technically? Somewhere in that area. Do we stay there a long time? I don't know. But it's an area we could certainly see. The funds turn south and start selling and going short. We could see that kind of price. Now that's not, again, trying to forecast the price and when it happens, or, I'd be happy if I had one or the other, but getting them both right is difficult. But I would say the most likely set of circumstances is to see that kind of a price following a trend or better South American crop somewhere in the late winter period. I don't think you're going to see that at harvest. I don't think you're going to see it at harvest, but I do think you could see it late in the year, which means it's going to be, with crops that we do have left over that are unhedged, we need to be very careful about what we do with those. I would not be comfortable sitting all winter with unhedged grain. We could look at something very similar to what we did this year. If you guys recall, we sold a $5 July call because there was good carry, and that's one of the things you can take advantage of. If we see $4 for December corn in a big crop year, you're probably looking at $4.25, $4.30 July corn, July 15 corn at that same time. So you can take advantage of that. You can sit there and say, I'll tell you what, if I'm going to throw it in a bin, I'm going to own a $4 July put because I'm not taking any less than I could have got at harvest. I'll most likely get some basis appreciation to at least pay my cost to carry, if not more than that. And then if the market moves up, I could be stuck with $5 corn, which again, could be a real good problem to have. But to go through the whole winter with nothing underneath you, with the possibility of following a decent South American crop is pretty dangerous, in my opinion. And you may not like $4 corn, but there's nothing wrong with saying I'm not going to take any worse than that, and if it goes higher, then I'll accept that. So we are very likely to start looking at those kind of strategies. You guys know I like to walk. Let me rephrase that. I walk fields. I don't like to walk them, but I like the information that you get out of them. I'd like to get to that point where we're not sitting on unhedged, what now will become old crop grain, probably early August at the latest. I'd like to get that last 25% at the latest hedge, and it may come well before that. That's kind of the line in the sand date, is to get it hedged up, at least set floors. Give us some upside, but set some kind of a floor, because that's the risk that's in the market. And the sooner you realize that, then you start thinking, oh gosh, maybe $5 for the rest of my crop isn't bad, or $4.50, or whatever that number is, because that's the risk that's out there. For the bean market, right now there's a double bottom low at 10.88 1/4, and that is the only support really of significance left in the market after yesterday's big scar on the charts. Again, we may not see that price until we know more about August weather. We see how the old crop market finally plays out, because it is tight. But you got to look at it this way. The USDA is saying right now they're looking for an average price, average cash price for soybeans next year, $10. And if you start doing the math and look at ratios as we get out into February of 2015, if we saw 350 spot corn, even at a 2.5 to 1 ratio, which is the high end of the 2 to 2.5 historical, that's 875. Am I forecasting 875? No, but I'm trying to prepare you for what's possible out there, and that's at a high-end ratio. That's at the high end of that traditional soybean to corn ratio. So there is that kind of risk out there, whether you want to believe it or not, and 11-something dollar beans, we may spend a long time looking up at that price. Basis-wise, I don't see a lot of basis risk over the next 45 to 60 days. You're going to see an equal number, in my opinion, of farmers dumping old crop as opposed to ones that don't want to sell any new crop. The other thing that's important to remember, I heard some elevators, I think this is more wishful thinking than anything else, saying, well, we might be able to buy corn at 40 under. And I said, remember, I go 40 under $4, 10% of the value of corn. 40 under $8, 5% of the value of corn. So, and that may be a little bit of wishful thinking, and our local bid is, you know, most of your local elevator bids are in the 25, 27 under for corn, new crop corn. You probably get an ethanol plant to do a little better for you. But I don't see a tremendous amount of basis risk now. That's the other reason I walk fields, is I like to get some kind of idea what kind of crop I have so we know what we won't be able to store in the fall. So that's when we'll start looking at setting basis on particularly on the portion of the crop you won't be able to store. Because we could have a big one coming in the fall, and you don't want to be pricing, you know, being forced to either price or pay storage at that time of year. You know, 200 bushel corn at $4, $800 an acre, 160 at 5 is $800 an acre. And that's kind of the way you really need to start getting in that revenue mindset, as opposed to remembering the good old, well, some of you think the good old days, some of you it was nightmare days of $7 plus corn. Because, like I said, without a catastrophic, unforeseen event coming, you know, those days are over for a while. So any questions just on the corn and bean side of things? Any at all? Pricing, yields?
Do you think world markets will come to us now, more so, or where will they?
Well, you know, it's going to be like it always is. You've got your, you know, your price it to go markets like Baltic areas. You know, they're gonna take share. The other thing that we've kind of forgotten, you know, Brazil's got a real big winter corn crop they're working on, just starting to harvest now. Argentina's corn harvest came late. And Brazil's first corn harvest, actually, they delayed putting those bushels on the market so they could service their soybean customers. So we're really looking at a market where we're going to see a saturated corn market for some time. There are carryover South American stocks that are going to have to be marketed. We've got good European, former Soviet Union crops on the way. We've got a good crop on the way. Monday's exports were below expectations for the second week in a row. And I think we talked about this early in the spring, that at some point those bushels, you know, the Brazilians did such a good job getting soybeans to market as they were needed at the expense of corn. Well, that corn's got to go now. And it's coming on top of a good winter crop they have, which their winter crop is, I don't think it's quite half, but it's close to half of all the corn they produce. So there's a lot of corn going to be hitting the global markets here in the next 4 months, let's say. So ultimately, yeah, but we got a lot of corn to move first. A lot of corn. It's a buyer's market, okay? There's no question about that. You know, it's been a seller's market, it's now a buyer's market. And you're not going to see buyers chase this market. There's no reason for them to chase it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you discussed a little bit earlier, but just when are we thinking about maybe starting pricing 15 cents?
This summer. I think we need to delve into it, Dave. And
in summer now.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as we, you know, I'd like to get that initial 20-25% done here on just any kind of a little bounce here going into that August crop report. So what is it, July 1st today? So we're talking next 42 days, roughly-ish, 43 days. I would like to get that sale on before, well, we're not going to meet July 12th because it's going to be just acreage tweaking, but we will definitely meet right after that August crop report and talk about field surveys and what the USDA said. And I'd like to have that on the books by then. And again, Dave, we're looking at something more than likely option-based, okay? And I love, by the way, guys, I love the short-dated options. I think they're a great tool. No longer have to take the spread risk. The savings you can make and doing it around seasonal, you know, you can sit there and own an August or a September short-dated option. You don't have to play the SEP-DEES or the SEP-NOV corn or soybean spread against it when they come due. That just takes that risk completely out of the market. You don't pay for all the time, and goodness gracious, by August 22nd, you know, a lot of times with these options, don't forget, what you're looking for is the, Lord help me if something goes really wrong. And by August 22nd, you may not know the yields by August 22nd, but you know if you're in one of those Lord help me something gone wrong phases, okay? And that's really what you want that for. Because by then, if it's in the money, you can sit there and say, well, I'm comfortable taking the futures now because I didn't have one of those moments. And you save a tremendous amount of money. You know, over time. That one we did against the May, we paid 2 cents for that. 2 lousy cents. And had December futures coverage on corn, replaced it with a $4.99 sale. Maybe it didn't look smart that day, but it looks pretty good today. So I really like those things, and we are going to use those as much as we can, and we'll be able to use them, you know, around some of the big things next year. You start looking at a March 31st acreage and planting intentions report of 2015. Why own December options in August if you could just own the May short dated of next year? We're going to know a heck of a lot more in May 15 than we know today. But we're not going to be paying all that time like we used to. So I really like those things and get used to those because they're here to stay. They're a really good risk management
Aren't they
tool.
somewhat expensive though? I mean,
Excuse me?
Aren't they somewhat expensive? I mean.
Well, anything that has a lot of time in it, Dave, is going to be expensive, but you're looking at it from a relative standpoint in terms of what would the May short dated be versus the DEES 15. Okay? There's going to be a heck of a price spread in between those two. It also, and this is what you lose sight of, you're not married to that position. When you buy that DEES 15, a lot of times you feel like, well, I'm kind of pot committed now. You know, I paid pretty good premium for it. I don't know what's going to happen between May and August of 2015. But I'm kind of committed to it, whereas these things force you sometimes, as it did us. It forced us into a decision that day. When those options expired, it was like, well, now what we do? Well, first of all, we only had 2 cents committed to them, so, you know, it's like taking a girl out. You know, you only took her to McDonald's, you didn't take her to some fancy French restaurant. You can walk away from that date pretty quick, if you ever get a date. But
You take her to the nursing.
so, you know, it gives you an opportunity. Say, okay, I swung at the first pitch and missed, but I can go ahead and swing again and still not pay as much as I would have for that full term premium. Okay, so I like them for that reason. Like I said, there's very few things in life that are win-win. It's easy for me to sit here as a broker and say, oh, I like them because Dave's going to do 2 of them instead of 1. But it's also in Dave's best interest because he can adjust it up and down where his strikes are, and he still hasn't spent as much. And things change really, really quick, and it gives you that opportunity to be a little more flexible. So yes, to answer Dave's question, I would like to get that first quarter done of 15. I'd like to get the next 25% for 14 corn and the next 25% for 14 beans in the next 42 or 43 days. We'll probably have to do some kind of a spread to keep, you know, like you said, that even a May short dated 215 would be expensive, but if we buy a little time, sell a little time, you know, that's something that we can manage in terms of overall cost, try to keep that cost reasonable. And of course, you know, we can live with a, you know, this far out if you own a 450 put and you sell a $5 call against it and it's only 20-25% of your first swing next year, you know, $5 sounds better than 4 to me anyway, and from a cash management standpoint, on a small portion like that, it's something we can manage. Other questions about grain, other than wheat, we're going to talk about in a second.
You want to touch on the new margin requirements?
Yes, Bill, thank you very much. I would have kicked myself all the way home had I forgotten to talk about it. Because of some of the shenanigans that have went on with some of these large outfits, New York, what have you, our governor of New Jersey, Corzine, and the CFTC, who is the managing, they are the regulatory agency of all the futures markets, are really coming down hard on all of the R.J. O'Briens of the world, the FCMs of the world. And as a result, there are changes coming that, quite frankly, you're not going to like, I don't like, but it is what it is. There is a new margin policy that starts today. It was supposed to start January 1st, or June 1st, and it phases in to early November. And basically, you guys remember, and we've never had a problem in this group, but typically you had 5 days and unofficially 5 figures before they started giving you a hassle on the margins. They're dropping that down to 3 and then 2 days. by early November, you have 2 days. After the second day, they fine you. If you put a trade on, if you have an open order in, okay? If you have an open order in that you forget about, that puts you in a position while you're on margin call into a new position, they'll fine you. And I saw, the first one I saw, we had somebody, went past 5 days, $100 fine. Comes right out of your account. I don't want to see that, you don't want to see that.
I didn't have it anyway.
So how do we avoid this? Well, there are a couple ways. I would recommend that you guys, and I can send the form out again, I would recommend that you set up an ACH draft with R.J. O'Brien. You don't want to know what an ACH is. It's basically a pre-existing agreement between your bank and R.J. O'Brien, where with a phone call, it's not something that gets done automatically. You have to initiate it. But with a phone call, you can call your bank and say, authorize a $5,000 draft to R.J. O'Brien. And it goes out that day. So we don't worry about mail delivery. We don't worry about anything. It gets done that day. There's always been the ability to wire. If you ever wire, they don't charge for wires. They used to, but they figured it was easier. They'd eat it just to get the money right away. But I would rather you set up the ACH deposit. It's a one-page document. I will send it out tomorrow, and I would highly recommend you do it because it's not anything different what you're doing today. It just eliminates the mailman and the check writing and all that. It's nothing that they can pull out without your permission. You have to authorize it every time, but it sure cuts down on some of these headaches that are coming. It's bad enough making a margin call, it's worse paying a fine on top of it. It's nothing I control, it's nothing RJO can control. This is coming down from all our good friends in Washington.
Are you gonna do this back to us?
I will send you guys out the form.
No, if somebody calls and Dave says.
Oh, if you want your
"Put it
money
on my
back,
account,"
yes, you can get your money that day too. They will ACH it back to your account.
Because at one time, not to be smart, you said, don't keep much money up here because of all the shenanigans.
Sure.
This is not a bank.
Sure.
Do not use it for a bank.
Right.
Just
Yeah, you can also make that same call, or
Might trade that.
you would call me, and I would put in an ACH deposit request, okay? And they'll send it right to your bank that day.
But
Send
don't
money
keep
out.
much money up there.
I don't think anyone should ever keep much money up there.
Yeah.
Now, I'd be lying to you, Jeff, if I didn't say psychologically it helps sometimes.
Sure.
Because guys,
Do that.
if you send out 10 checks for $10 and it's only $100, still it gets old. I don't care if it's $100. If you do anything 10 times, well, I'll stop there. We'll stop there. But anyway, Bill, thanks for bringing that up because I slipped my mind. That was something I definitely wanted to cover. Because they're really, really, really getting tough with this. So I will send those out. The form comes back to me, and then I'll send it to Chicago. And then it's just a matter, like I said, we'll do the same as we always did. If you get on margin, we'll call you, and then you'll have to tell us, if you want to go ahead and do the ACH. And that, then it's taken care of that day. Thank you. Any other grain questions before we spend a small amount of time on wheat?
On your positions in corn, if your options, and a huge crop coming on potentially, what's our best way to get maximum return on our on-farm storage?
Off farm?
On-farm.
On farm. Well, typically, Rick, the question was, with a big crop year, how do you maximize your storage that you have on farm? Big crops put in big carries, typically. And the only way you earn that carry is by having it in a bin and trapping that carry. So what that means is either A, you turn around and you sell that premium. That's one way. That's the easiest way to figure it out. Or B, if you're not ready to sell, you can put a spread on, so you don't have any delivery commitment. What you would do is you'd sell, for example, we'll put it in real terms. Let's say there's a 25-cent carry from December to July corn. You would sell the July corn and buy the December corn on a spread. Spread like that in the same calendar year, really cheap. Couple $100 margin per contract. Effectively on that day, what you're saying is I'm trapping a quarter. If it goes to 30, you're going to have 5 cents opportunity costs you left on the table. But you trapped a good return on your space. So that's one way to do it. That's the second way to do it, is to put spreads on. The third way to do it is, when we use options, and put them out against the July, where, you can do a $4, like if corn's at $4 in the Dece and $4.25 in the July, I talked before, we might buy a $4 July put that's 25 cents out of the money to save ourselves some money. You're still getting the same guarantee that you get today for $4, but you're using that carry to help cheapen your option premium, is what you're doing. So that's a third way to take advantage of having grain that you have in a bin. Obviously, there are, you would expect maybe some basis gains, seasonal basis gains. We'd have to look at the actual size of the crop. When you get a really, really big crop, oftentimes when the bin doors slam, you get a bump in the basis into early, mid-December. And if it's a really big crop, we might have to take it and look at that in terms of a delivery. Of course, we have to look at the carry in the futures as well and weigh those against each other and say, has the basis went enough? We talked last fall, I think it was you, Rick, as a matter of fact, I said I thought we'd see 20 over the July for corn because of weakening prices on the future side. And we, Ohio River happened to be one of the better markets because the export market was so good, but we did see 20 over. With a bigger carry, I don't think we'd see 20 over, Rick, but let's go back and look at our historicals. There were many years here where we said, when we get 5 over the July, we're going to run to the bank and be tickled pink because we were looking at 40 under the December for a fall harvest basis. 40 under the December with a 25-cent spread is 65 under the July. So if you got 5 over the July, now you're talking about a 70-cent premium versus a fall delivery price. Yes, you have some costs associated with storing them, but nothing close to 70 cents. So that's how you maximize your bins. You don't wait and let the market, in big crop years, we've talked about this before, Dece, March, May, July. As one comes off the board, it has a tendency to do this. And that carry just gets eaten away. And if you just leave it there, sitting there unprotected, you get none of it back.
So if we get in this February and March timeframe, when you think that there could be lows in the grain market, that might be our best basis opportunity.
You might see a good basis then because the farmer says, forget about it. And that's when you see, you think about it, let's say we saw 350 futures. A 20 over basis is 370. Is the livestock guy going to be disappointed with 370? Is the export guy going to be disappointed at 370? So you could see that kind of basis when you see extreme lows in the futures market. Then you throw that on top of the carry you locked in. Next thing you know, throw it on where your hedges were on top of that. Could a guy conceivably, net out $5 corn this year, even though he's not hedged at that position right now, maybe at $4.50 with a bin? Sure he could. Sure he could. I've been a big advocate for bins for just that reason. Not as a crutch to cover up your marketing mistakes, but as a way to maximize revenue. And let's not forget, guys, and this is important, you can earn 50 cents on a bin on $4 corn or $3.50 corn. It's a heck of a lot more to your bottom line than 50 cents on $7 corn in terms of importance. Double the importance of $3.50 versus $7 in terms of impact on your bottom line. Other questions? Okay, if you think one, we can come back to it. Wheat harvest. We don't have a lot of wheat, and unless I know most of you, I've already talked to you, we've taken steps in the past to lock in on, most of you, I think we did at least half of your wheat. The biggest problem we've had right now is yields have been exceptional from what I've heard, but we've also had exceptionally high vomitoxin levels. So it could be very difficult to, that's one of the reasons I've never been, nor will I ever continue to be, a big proponent of cash wheat contracts out into the future. There's just too many things with wheat that can go wrong. You have the best crop ever, and then it rains right, and you end up with disease. You can have a horrible winter, come out in spring, and it's not worth carrying into maturity. So one thing about quality issues, I always hear this, people go, well, gosh, if it's got vomitoxin, the price is going to go up, right? No, it's the exact opposite. You mark it down blue light special to get rid of it, especially with the global wheat crop in good shape. If you've got quality issues, get rid of it yesterday. Get rid of it yesterday. Oftentimes the discounts and the rejections get worse and worse as the scope of the problem becomes more and more known as well. In terms of where you can get rid of it, we got hog guys around here, most of them with battling PED and what have you, they don't want to deal with it. Cattle guys are probably your best market. If you can find a cattle guy to get in touch with, that might be one of your better markets because of their ability to take higher levels of vomitoxin. I know at least one ethanol plant that will take as is any wheat. You may or may not like the price, but they'll take it if you get to a point where you just say, I got to get rid of it somewhere. The guys up at CIE said they'd take all the wheat they get, and they're hauling quite a bit of DDGs to the river and back hauling, so from a freight standpoint, they might be competitive to somebody who's relatively
What happened
close.
to that vomitoxin level in that wheat when it went into DDG?
That's a good question. I don't know, Jeff. And I think what they're
How do
looking.
I know if I'm getting wheat in my DDG?
I think they're looking at more of a blend. Well, they have to monitor, obviously they're going to monitor for quality, like, they can't sell poor quality DDGs. But I think what they do it in such a blend where they get rid of it at levels that are acceptable in their DDGs. So, any other questions in wheat? I mean, it's out there. Don't hang on to it. Get rid of it as quickly as you can if it has. Now, conversely, if you've got high quality wheat, there's good carry in the market. You may want to consider carrying that stuff for a couple months, as long as you take care of it. I have so many wheat horror stories I could have told you about, and weevils and I'm just not a big, if you store wheat, by God, and you keep it in condition, you earn it, as far as I'm concerned. But it's available. If you got it, you're probably looking at some good, millers are going to be looking for high quality wheat. Other than that, guys, that is the grain portion of today's meeting. Any questions that you've thought of since about anything other than politics?
So what do you think about the world situation? How will the rest of the world react to the low prices and their production standpoint?
Well, I mean, let's look at like China, for example. China's building, what they've done so far is they've announced they're going to build additional storage capability. They're willing to store. They've got a lot of corn that they bought high priced off farmers last year that they can't, they can get rid of it, but they've been trying to auction off and nobody wants to buy it because you can get it cheaper. It is really, not only in the U.S., it's important you get your mind around the idea that it's going to be a global buyer's market for some time. And you can store it. Let's not forget that every time you have a China who grows a good crop and storing, not only does that impact there, but it impacts us because they're not buying. So, it's going to be, how do you get rid of a surplus globally? You mark it down. So, that report yesterday, I mean, it's really, particularly for the bean market, we were already looking at an all-time high projected carryout on global soybean stocks. We've talked the last 6 months that we have a logistics problem in beans. We do not have a supply problem. Well, that logistics problem is going to be over shortly. And then we're going to have a big supply problem for soybeans with all those acres. And the South Americans, to go further with your question, hey, they're going to plant beans over corn next year due to costs. So that problem could get worse.
Even with beans as well, is there going to be an opportunity from a basis standpoint to deliver some beans quick?
Question is, will bean basis improve enough for some quick shipment stuff? Are you talking about like early shipment or like post-harvest?
Right out of the field.
Yeah, there will be, I know some people that planted some early varieties. There will be some basis premiums, there's no question. Again, having been in the commercial industry, Do not go home Friday looking at a bid, anticipating you'll harvest over the weekend and deliver Monday against that bid. It can change hourly and does change hourly. If you look at the weather forecast and it looks okay, and you look at your crop and it looks okay, and you know, kind of as a refresher, if you can get through 17% beans and harvest them, financially it's about the same as 12% beans. And that's not counting field loss, that's just on water weight, taking the discounts against it. So if you're going to do the early shipment thing, it's the second you know you're going to be able to deliver them, contract them. Set that basis, because it could disappear quickly. But yes, there will be some quick shipment, and there usually and probably will be that little pop, post-harvest pop into the end of the year. And unless there's a carry in the market, which if South America has a good crop on the way, you're not going to see a carry. It'll be you could see an inversion because of the nature of the way the bean market has changed. With them being the majority growers in the world now, you have two tiers of bean pricing. You have U.S. old crop and you have South American, or U.S. new crop, South American new crop. So you may not, it's probably not going to make any sense to carry beans into March, May. We'll be getting rid of them well before then, I would suspect. And you may want not only the premium on the bean basis, but the extra storage it may grant you. So you got to take that into account as well. Other grain questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming, and we'll talk hogs in a minute.